My new job requires me to work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., but every midnight my task is to hide in a special room. Quite the strange rule, right? Greetings, everyone. You can call me Cole. It is a much shorter version of my real name since it is very long and difficult to pronounce. The story you are reading involves a real company, so to avoid any issues with that institution, I will only refer to it as such. Around the beginning of 2022 to this very day, the concerning problem of load shedding ravages the country I live in. Almost every day for a period of 1 hour, the power goes out twice or thrice at varying times and locations indicated by an app. Most often, these interruptions in electricity supply happen during the night to avoid disturbing businesses' operations during the day, since solutions such as electric generators and green energy are still neither popular nor affordable. Consequently, crimes such as theft rose during the night and skyrocketed the demand for security, thus creating opportunities for employment. Therefore, after a long period of search and hardship, on the 7th of September 2023, I have finally found an employment with a very generous salary to support myself and my family of 4. The job? A seemingly normal position of a security officer, tasked to guard an indoor storage facility, all alone and during the night. My work days and hours are Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. The only concern? One strange and mysterious rule revolving around a particular time and also a particular place, approximately worded like this in my contract. From 12 a.m. to 12:59 a.m., be in the black room. Before 1 a.m., do not interact with anyone, and do not leave the black room, no matter the circumstances. Allowed to sleep in the black room from 12 a.m. to 12:59 a.m. Basically, that time frame serves as my pause, but for unknown reasons I had to spend it in the black room. That depressing place deserves its name since it is a small room with its steel door, an entire interior completely painted with the darkest black I have ever seen, so dark that it seemed to absorb and dim any source of light, equipped with a black chair, a black clock, a metallic bucket painted in black and placed on top of a black cupboard, and even a black couch. The small place is also the control room from which I can monitor the entire facility. For other unknown reasons, I could only get my black uniform on the 13th and I started working the very next day. During the first night, I followed the rules and did not witness anything uncanny until I caught a glimpse of something strange on the monitors, active during the entire midnight. There was a bizarre phenomenon affecting the cameras turn by turn, translating into a severe distortion, affecting the corresponding monitors in the control room one after the other. Something I could not identify due to the anomaly moved around freely in the whole building, before stopping right in front of the black door at 12:58 a.m. and disappearing at 1 a.m. The camera in front of the black room also returned to normal functioning at exactly 1 a.m. Upon reporting the occurrence to my employer, he completely ignored it and just reminded me to follow the rules. What can I complain about? I desperately need this job, but also when I think about police officers, mortuary assistants, miners and graveyard keepers, and the things they may be confronted to, I end up with the conclusion that a job is a job, with its good and bad sides, therefore I need to remain a brave man. Yesterday, on the 15th, the second night, consumed by my fear or my curiosity, I clocked in at 7 p.m. and planned to get a glimpse of the thing with my naked eye, by looking under the black door any time it will pass by the black room. To my disappointment, at 11 p.m., I realized that the steel door does not have any space whatsoever through which I could see anything. Therefore, I settled for just watching the monitors, unprepared for what was about to unfold. Unlike the previous night, this time the distortion was accompanied by sounds coming from outside the room. Noises of the storage unit doors vibrating at the passage of the unseen and unknown entity. At 12:17 a.m., the thing passed in front of the black room, and its door shook too, prompting me to stand up in fear. My heart beating as I began to sweat, I tried to contact the authorities both on the radio and on my phone. Both had their screens flickering as they malfunctioned. I had to face the situation all alone. At 12:34 a.m., the intruder passed again in front of the black room, and that time the door shook so violently that I believed it was about to come off the frame. Trembling in fear, I stepped backwards until I hit the cupboard behind me, and unfortunately, the metallic bucket fell from it and hit the floor, making the corresponding and appropriate loud sound that gained the attention of the intruder. Did I just interact? By the definition of the word, I did not. That was an involuntary occurrence engineered by my fear, however. The thing stopped moving. I looked at the monitors and saw that the camera in front of the black room was still affected by the entity with its corresponding screen flickering, and the door was still shaking, allowing me to confirm that the entity stood right there on the other side of the entrance. I remained immobile and silent, sweating and breathing rapidly until the vibration of the door and the distortion on the monitors both stopped at the same time. When I looked at the clock, it was 1 a.m. This time I avoided complaining to my employer and submitted what I would call a clean report. To safely work, I plan on equipping myself with a few useful things before going back there. Guys, you know my schedule. I work during 2 consecutive days before a pause. On each day off, I plan on updating you guys on the events of the 2 previous nights, but for the rest of this beautiful Saturday and tomorrow Sunday, let me enjoy the company of my wife and kids, the reason why I have to do this job. On Monday the 18th and Tuesday the 19th, I will be clocking in at 7 p.m. According to the app, in the area where my workplace is situated, there will be load shedding on Wednesday the 20th from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. I will spend that hour in the black room. Wish me luck. My hands are still shaking, as I did expect to go through some strange experiences during my 2 last shifts, but not to the extent you are about to discover. Last Sunday, I prepared for the next 2 shifts just like I told you in my previous post. Despite not really knowing what I am up against, I figured that there were some useful things I could get to put myself in some form of advantage, if I may say. Therefore, after a little turn by the supermarket, and using the maximum amount of money I could for that purpose, I came back home with a machete, a nail gun for lack of something better like a pistol, and some fancy flashlights that I was certain to be resistant to electromagnetic disturbance. Upon arriving home with the items, my wife, who was not convinced by how great I had described my new working environment, asked me again a few details about my new job. Once again, not wanting to unearth old matters of contention, I lied to her in order to keep the peace. More on those matters in later posts. On Monday, I arrived at work around 6:33 p.m. and got ready for the shift in a few minutes. Nothing in that place looks extraordinary. I can assure you of that. No matter the time, everything just looks normal and absolutely not out of place. It is just that midnight thing that is the black stain in what I thought would be a bright picture. 5 minutes before the dreaded time, I took the items to the black room and put them in the cupboard. Except for the machete. For some reason, I considered the machete more useful than the traditional security guard baton, and I sat with it in front of the monitors, waiting for the scary show to begin. At 12 a.m., the anomaly began as usual at the main entrance as the camera in that area started malfunctioning. Just like during the first night, it roamed around silently, not shaking any door, and passed in front of the black door at 12:17 a.m. Of course, due to the distortion, I could not see a thing on the monitor, which in turn really fed my curiosity. I do not know about you, but I am not the kind of person to just obey to a mysterious rule. Can you imagine renting a house, for example, and being told that a specific door must never be open, without even stating the reason why? What if it is because there are human remains there? I made a bold plan to get a glimpse of this mysterious midnight being. I watched its movements on the monitors, which then seemed to me to be patterned and unaltered, as long as no disruption occurs. Also, the contract never mentioned anything about the black room door. I can be in a room without locking the door. Even by leaving the door wide open, I can still be in the room. Following my reasoning, at 12:33 a.m., I stood at the door and opened it just a little, just enough to get a fair view of the corridor. Through the monitors, I saw the thing approaching the black room and got ready to see it with my naked eyes. Something emitting a warm yellow light was approaching, as if in those well-lit corridors, someone was walking around holding a flame torch. Before I could see the source of the light, or the person holding it, or whatever it really was, I felt my heartbeat accelerating. Something just felt wrong, and the hair on my skin rose as if I turned into a frightened cat. I could not allow myself to see what that thing was and quickly closed and locked the door. Once again, it stood right on the other side of the door, and did not move from there until 1 a.m., then disappeared. I came out a few minutes afterwards to a completely normal environment, but kept my machete just in case. The next night on Tuesday was the one with the scheduled load shedding. Once again, I sat down in front of the monitors until the lights went out, plunging me in complete darkness at exactly 12 a.m. At that time, I figured it would really be nice to take a nap, but I realized that there was not even a mattress in the room. After setting an alarm for 1 a.m., I just put the chair against the wall, sat with my legs and arms crossed, and closed my eyes, hoping to sleep as fast as I could. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Without the aid of the monitors then off because of the load shedding, I could not pinpoint the exact location of the thing and could not risk opening the door in that total darkness. I just listened attentively till I stood up, getting closer to the door. I retrieved one of the flashlights that I bought in the cupboard and switched it on, only to see the light flickering. Despite that, I could read 12:17 a.m. on the clock as I approached the door again. I heard the rapid footsteps getting further and further until I could no longer hear them. At 12:22 a.m., they came back, but this time it sounded like there were at least 4 persons walking quickly instead of just one. What on earth was that? I thought. At 12:38 a.m., they came back again in the black room corridor, then sounding like a whole platoon of soldiers jogging in front of the door. The steps were so heavy that the door was shaking until they just came to an abrupt end, plunging the already dark place in an ominous silence. Out of the blue, the thing outside started banging on the door while trying to open it as the doorknob turned. I fell in fear and started to crawl backwards. I wanted to handle my machete but could not even think of where I had put it, watching the door being forced by the intruder, all trough the flickering of the flashlight. Once again, everything just stopped, and the short and deep silence that almost pierced my ears was suddenly broken by the giggle of a woman. Not a friendly giggle, rather like a "I'll get you one day" type of giggle. Who was that? I kept my eyes on the door, trembling in fear, until the alarm on my phone scared me even more when 1 a.m. rang and the power came back on. There was no way I could set foot out there before morning. I remained in the black room until the end of my shift, thinking deeply about my situation and my life. I am paid weekly, which means that last week I could at least get half of the pay. I will not lie. That piece of the cake seemed hefty and wiped out a big chunk of my wife and I financial concerns. I came home today morning, seeing my wife and the kids all excited about a few things we could buy for the house and ourselves. There was no way I could take that kind of joy away from them. I just have to keep working. However, before I return to work tomorrow, Thursday, I need to have a serious conversation with somebody. On Thursday, September 21st, 2023, following my supervisor's instructions, I went to work at 5 p.m., ensuring that I was early enough to maximize the time frame of our meeting. Unfortunately, he only freed himself at 6 p.m., and he told me right from the beginning that we only had 20 minutes. Our conversation looked like this. "What is your problem, Cole? Like seriously, aren't you happy to have a job and sustain your family?" he asked. "At the expense of my sanity? My life. Aren't you man enough to handle this job? Do you think everyone out there have it easy? Or that there's only you that go through pressure?" "Sir, this thing trying to get me. What's this thing? What's that midnight thing all about?" I desperately asked, only to be slapped with the reply I least expected. "I don't know," my supervisor replied. "What? I'm sorry, even I." "Your supervisor, yes, even I don't know. Maybe you should ask the CEO, that is if you can get in touch with her. I'm not sure she replies to mails though, but do you think it's all those people out there that will give you the answer?" "What? What people?" "You think I didn't see your posts online?" he asked, baffling me. "Yeah, right. Look at me with your big eyes now." "I saw them. Do you think those people will give you answers?" "So it's a trend now, right? The moment an employee is unhappy, the whole situation ends up on a sub," he questioned. I'm really sorry, sir. I just wanted to cut the crap. There's no policy in our institution that forbids such behavior. You can even continue if that can help you cope, as long as you don't name the company or anyone involved in the business, even if it's a dog, all right? And also, don't cheat like last time. After midnight, everything is back to normal, whatever it means to you, and you're expected to be patrolling, not chilling the whole night in the black room. Okay, understood, sir. I always told you to just follow the rules. You're all safe in that room. What's hard with that? Sir, it's insane. I mean, this ain't normal. And also, what happened to the previous guy, I asked. You're looking at him. Look, this is really like a training process for you, like I told you. This whole first month. But if you think you can't handle this job, you might consider leaving, he said, as he stood up to leave himself. And you know, if you can't handle pressure, then there's no job for you anywhere in the world. There are good and bad days at work. That's just the truth. Don't be thinking that remote workers or influencers have it easy. Nobody does. Especially in this company. Look more closely. We all have our rules to follow, even myself. One of them is not to be here at 6:30 p.m. At this time, only you should be here, he added, and walked away. Thank you very much, sir, I simply replied. Oh, and word of advice for a stubborn type like you. If you find yourself trapped, just make sure to have your full uniform on. Close your eyes and don't make a single move or sound, he revealed. Or else, I inquired before he reached the door. He simply lifted his shirt to reveal the most disturbing scar I have ever seen on someone's belly. The stitches made it so worse that it looked like the closed mouth of a crocodile. Just be like drivers. If they don't follow the rules, they cause accidents, they die, and even kill as well in the process. Cole, follow the rules. I'll give you a call tonight, you might need other tips, he said with a smile. Then left. The shift on Thursday completely went almost uneventful. At midnight, I was in the black room just waiting for the entity to display the new tricks it had in store for me. It appeared at the entrance at 12 a.m. as usual, but just remained there. It did not roam around and only stood there, affecting the camera at the entrance of the building. Since it was far, I could even use my phone and the radio as it could not affect it from that distance, and my wife called me. Our little boy of 5 years old was having difficulties to sleep, so my wife figured that he wanted me to sing our own composed lullaby, something I usually do for my kids. Afterwards, we talked a little bit, but my wife insisted on my job, telling me that she knew that attitude and asked if I wanted to quit. She knows me well, and I used to quit my previous jobs as soon as I was fed up without thinking of the consequences. We almost argued about it because she thinks that I am on the verge of doing it and letting my family down again. After almost an hour of reassuring her, we concluded the call on a more positive note. It was 1:08 a.m. by that time, and of course the entity had completed its shift. Therefore, it was time to resume mine. However, I could not have braced myself for what awaited on Friday. Everything once again started peacefully until midnight. At 12 a.m., unlike the day before, the entity was nowhere to be seen, not a distortion on a single camera. The coast looked clear. 30 minutes later, I wanted to check my phone and I realized that I had forgotten it in the restroom, right next to the black room. Whatever my supervisor had to say, I wanted to hear it since I am sure he knows more than he is willing to tell, so I could not miss that call. Like my supervisor said, there are good and bad days at work, therefore, if the entity chose to take a day off, I might be at peace for once. I decided to take the risk of retrieving my phone. Armed with my machete, I slowly opened the door, and my jaw dropped at the scenery I discovered. Instead of the corridor, I saw the windowless living room of a really old house. An old wooden house surely decorated by an old lady from the 50s. A few meters away, carefully placed on a small wooden table, my phone emitted a bizarre static sound before I could hear my voice from it, performing the same lullaby I sing for my children, to my absolute bewilderment. I then slowly looked at the monitors, and am really grateful for doing so, as I saw them rapidly distorting one after the other, because the entity was speeding towards the black room at a velocity I did not know it had. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Not even 10 seconds later, I heard it approaching and growling, and it soon began to pound on the door. The worst was not that thing trying to force the door open. It was its growls, switching from that of a beast to that of a woman, to that of a kid, to that of a man, and other things I cannot even describe. I ended up curled on the floor, my hands covering my ears because its rage screams were deafening. At 1 a.m., everything abruptly stopped. I do not know if I missed my supervisor's call, but ultimately, we did not get to talk. After my shift, I returned home ready to ignore my wife and quit. I also thought that I could at least get some rest and free my mind from what I just went through. I was wrong. My son was the first to welcome me as soon as I stepped in. My wife could only tell me that the excitement came from a dream that he had last night. When I asked him about it, he explained the dream in details, telling us that the whole family was on a deserted island, dressed like pirates, something he really likes to do. A voice then told him that fruits, water, and a treasure were hidden somewhere, and that the only condition for the family to access those good things was for me to just get out of the black room. On Monday, when I exited my home at around 6:08 p.m., I saw a man masked with a black motorcycle helmet roaming around in the area. Upon asking about his behavior, without taking his helmet off, he just told me that he was looking for a certain address, but he might be in the wrong area. He did not let me help him further, ignoring me as he walked back too, then hopped on his motorcycle before speeding off. Commuting never felt so depressing as I kept browsing for job offers on my phone until I arrived at work at 6:37 p.m. Yeah, I do not live that far from work, one of the few benefits of this job. I met my day shift counterpart when I reached the entrance. We exchanged greetings and a few words about daily life, before the conversation moved to more serious matters. My colleague's uniform is all red, and he has several rules that just seem normal, except for the one concerning the black room. Unlike me, he is not allowed to be there or even see the inside of that room. That alone comforted me in the idea to leave that circus. During the shift, I could not chase my unease away, and before midnight I opted for a different approach to the situation. I went outside of the building at 11:55 p.m. and locked the door behind me. That thing could haunt the building, but not the whole area for sure. I stood at the entrance in front of the glass sliding doors, confident that I would see this thing with my own eyes and in absolute safety. At 12 a.m., nothing manifested at the entrance as it should, leaving me baffled. Still, there was a familiar static sound emitted by the radio that prompted me to look at it, and I saw its screen flickering, testifying of the presence of the entity. After about 10 minutes later, at the windows I saw dark gray smoke emanating from several parts of the building. At first I thought that the thing had started a fire, and I wanted to look for help, but I soon noticed something that fueled my curiosity. The smoke seemed alive and moved in a very unnatural way, filling the whole building to the point I could not see anything inside. I do not know if it was the real form of that thing, and I wish I could get that on video, but as you know, this being affects my phone too when nearby, and also I have to make sure not to compromise the company. The show lasted for the whole duration of midnight, and as soon as it was 1 a.m., the smoke just vanished. I approached cautiously and went back inside to resume my shift, hoping that I had found a hack to preserve my sanity. It did not take me 5 minutes to discover what the entity did while I was outside. My supervisor frantically tried to contact me on the radio at that instant, but I could not even reply to him, completely broken by the sight of all the storage units' doors torn apart with some of the stored items scattered on the floor. I'm really sorry about what happened, sir. I apologize for the umpteenth time the next afternoon on Tuesday. You didn't stay in the room. Now, look, my supervisor replied, you'll not receive any payment for this week. Can we agree on that, he added, since him and other higher-ups supervised emergency door replacements to cover the monumental blunder and the reputation of the institution. I stayed the whole day there, observing everything I could from where I sat. Everything and everyone seemed to be set like clocks or computer programs. I could not spot any genuine smile, any authentic laughter, as if all those people, just like me, only tried to get through the day before bolting out of there. Everyone was probably following rules. As for my family, it sure took a lot to reassure my wife that everything was fine, but at least I still had the job and was about to start a new shift. Not even 1 month and already so many events. That Tuesday evening, my heart remained very heavy, and even more, as soon as I sat in the black room at 11:47 p.m. I felt trapped in a prison and frustrated. At 11:50 p.m., I received a notification on the load-shedding app about an expected issue on a generating plant, forcing the electricity provider to implement an emergency interruption of supply set to start in 10 minutes at midnight. Feeling empty and livid, I just responded to the news by locking the door of the black room. At 12 a.m., the lights went out, and I assumed that the entity made its triumphant appearance at the entrance. At 12:15 a.m., my phone rang and I saw that it was my wife calling. I really thought that my son had trouble sleeping again, since I did not even get back home that day, but the purpose of the call was much worse than I expected. We were going back and forth because of her panic while I tried to understand her, but from what I could grasp, she was hiding somewhere in the house with the kids, waiting for the police she had already called, because a man with a black motorcycle helmet had broken into our home. My heart sank when they all screamed in terror, and the call ended, meaning that the man had probably found them. When I tried to call back, the screen was flickering, and I looked at the clock to see that it was 12:17 a.m., and the entity was passing by the black room. After waiting for a few minutes, the thing was far enough for my phone to return to normal, and I called my wife back, and it went straight to voicemail. I tried to call the police, but my phone and the radio suddenly both died, leaving me with no other options. This was about my family. I do not care if the supervisor sees this post, or about the opinions of those who think that I am stubborn, careless, or downright dumb. I grabbed my nail gun, one of the fancy flashlights, and took a deep breath before exciting the black room. I just have to reach the back entrance, get outside, get some help, or maybe even use one of the company vehicles at the parking if possible. I ran in the dark corridors, continuously checking behind and in front of me. Things seemed a little bit too calm. After all, that was the opportunity for that thing to finally make a winning move. I made my way in the sea of darkness, but unfortunately did not reach the expected destination. I could not make any mistake. I was at the back entrance, but instead of seeing the door, there was just a wall that soon reflected my shadow as a warm yellow light approached behind me. That sensation overwhelmed me again. The sensation of something really wrong, something that should not be there and should not be happening. Cold invaded my back as my hair stood, my eyes became watery, and I trembled uncontrollably. I suddenly remembered my supervisor's words. If you find yourself trapped, just make sure to have your full uniform on. Close your eyes and don't make a single move or sound. Switching off the flashlight, I noticed that I indeed had the full uniform on, up to the cap and the gloves. I handled the flashlight and the nail gun tight before putting my back against the wall. I closed my eyes to avoid seeing that thing I also desperately wanted to see and understand. The entity sauntered towards me, probably savoring the moment. I could not hear any footstep, but I heard the metallic sounds of an old kerosene lantern. The darkness of my closed eyes turned to red as the lamp got inches away from my face, moving from side to side as if the entity was examining me. I was breathing rapidly but quietly enough. I wanted to cry so bad. I wanted to scream so loud. I wanted to run so fast. But the memory of my family, along with that of my supervisor's scar, cemented me against the wall. "Open your eyes," it whispered. But I remained silent and still. It then took the terror to new heights. Numerous hands then landed on my body as the entity continued the mind torture. I remained still but on the verge of explosion, retaining my tears and my urines. Some of the hands came from behind me, as if they emerged from the wall. Other hands had sharp nails or maybe claws, hurting me as they explored my skin, since the entity sought a reaction from me, while it kept on whispering, asking me to open my eyes. I went through the ordeal until a light almost blinded me and made the entity vanish. It was 1 a.m. and the power had returned. I stepped forward and fell on my knees, breathing heavily in relief. Remembering my family, I turned around to see that the back entrance had returned, and I heard my phone ringing. It was my wife. I picked up the call in panic, contrasting with her calm mood as she revealed that she has neither called me nor the police earlier. She just phoned back because she missed my call around 30 minutes ago, and a man's intrusion in our home had never occurred. I could not find any response to the baffling revelations and just hung up the call, looking around, looking at the mild wounds on my body, and wondering what on earth did I just get myself into. Last Wednesday, the time had finally arrived. It is hurtful and unfortunate, but this can no longer go on. There was no way to explain everything to my wife since she is not as open-minded as you people, therefore, I only told her that I was about to quit, again. We argued for hours because I could not tell her the truth about anything. Not even my wounds, but on the other hand, it was certainly better for my family not to know more about that job and especially that thing. Things at home are escalating quickly, with all my children now dreaming about the voice and demanding me to get out of the black room after developing a strange sickness that targets their lungs. Just like that, there was a monumental need for funds and I was about to quit in the middle of the storm. Conveniently, My supervisor contacted me the same day for us to have another meeting, certainly over the things that happened on Monday and Tuesday. That was the best occasion to end this nightmare, however. His response to my willingness to resign crushed me instantly. I thought we had an agreement? Well, I'm afraid you can't do that. You can't leave now. You signed a contract, he said. Following my protest, he retrieved his copy of the contract I am really sure to have read thoroughly before signing, and showed me the part that binds me to that company for the next 2 months before I can talk about resignation and vacation. I still argued, convinced that I was being tricked, but he brushed it off, saying that he did not even call me for such a hassle. Instead, the company wanted to congratulate me with a 30% raise. I was shocked. This could not happen after my blunder, and it did not make any sense at all. Upon leaving the building, I encountered the man with the black motorcycle helmet, seemingly waiting for someone. I attempted to ask him if he was lost again, but he retorted with a question about how I enjoyed my new job. From what I understood of our unfriendly exchange, that guy, who had no idea what that job was about, is a former applicant who resented me for getting the position. According to him, I did not even qualify for such a work, which for me is quite ironic. Now that I know about the job, I actually agree with him, even though he does not know what he is talking about. And I know that you people agree with him too, since I cannot stop breaking the rules. Ah, humans. Look at them angrily screaming at athletes during sport games, or at anyone else in a situation they are not directly involved in. Because from the outside looking in, everything seems so easy, until you step in the shoes of the person you are screaming at. However, I can see that some of you really want to help. Following your reasoning and suggestions, I bought a few other useful things to survive midnight. Among them, Bluetooth canceling noise earbuds, because I like music and we know that the entity likes to bang on the door for attention. Honestly, on Thursday, I was not ready to fall for that monster's tricks. The night started well until midnight rang, of course. Feeling cozy on the couch and under the blanket with my earbuds, I watched the entity roam around in the building from 12 a.m. to 12:34 a.m., affecting the cameras as usual, before it stopped at the black room door. I looked at the door and saw it shaking. Curious, I removed my earbuds to hear the entity banging on the door and growling. Yes, sure, suit yourself, I thought before putting the earbuds back, but after a few minutes, instead of the distorted music, I heard static and then my own voice. Imbecile. Idiot. Stupid. Moron. It is only a fool of your caliber that ends up in such a place. Fools like you are the reason I am still here. You do not even know the reason why you are in that chamber. Do you think you are safe inside? I shall pay you back for all the pain you are pouring on me. You shall know no rest until I crush your progeny, your love and everything you know. I shall start with. At that point I removed the earbuds, only to hear it continue its hate-filled rant behind the door, still using my own voice. ... your oldest, and you will be the last to fall. I shall feast on your fear, despair, and blood, until you beg me to. I clenched my teeth and put my hands on my ears to block the evil words. What was that thing even talking about? I remained curled up on the couch, doing my best to cancel the noise with my gloved hands until everything stopped at 1 a.m. I did not respond, I did not interact, and really survived at that time. I stayed in the room and respected the rules, something I really hope you are happy with. For once, I have not been stupid. Please do not hesitate to congratulate me. On Friday, I came back with noise-canceling earbuds for sleep, confident that the entity would not have any means of talking to me with those on. I was not ready for what awaited. Once again, at midnight I found myself on the couch and under the blanket with my earbuds and a flashlight, but after turning everything off, the light, the monitors, the radio, and my phone, I even brought some sleeping pills along but refrained from taking some, a fact that I believe has saved my life. For the first time, I managed to sleep in the black room, for maybe 20 minutes before I involuntarily started to cough. It got to the point where I could not even stop coughing, ultimately waking me up to witness a terrifying scenery. At first, I could not see anything in the dark, only perceiving the strong smell of smoke. I then switched my flashlight on and still could not see anything except for the cloud of dark gray smoke that surrounded me, hurting my eyes in the process. I feared having been teleported out of the black room, as I still have no idea about the extent of the entity's powers. Soon I heard it laughing so close that I thought it was right next to me. Was it a fire? Was that the entity's smoke that I had witnessed that time from outside the building? I wondered until I bumped into something metallic and shaking. It was the black room door. I was still inside. The entity was still outside, but it had found a way to hurt me. I coughed again and again, not even able to see what time it was and certain that I would die, suffocating inside that room. I ended up on the floor, defeated, hearing the entity rejoice. "You don't know what I'm capable of, dirty bastard. Everything just became worse because of you. I'll make you pay, you'll pay. I'll show you things that even Kevin never saw me do," it said, speaking like several people synchronized in saying the same words, before laughing uncontrollably. I changed his name to Kevin for the reasons you know, but understand that the entity had just mentioned my supervisor. Everything then suddenly stopped. The smoke had vanished, but I was still unable to breathe normally. Still on the floor, with my flashlight on, I looked at the clock and read the time, 1 a.m. Even at this very moment, I still think about those nights and the entity's words without finding out why it resents me so much for things I obviously do not know of. Just like I suspected, it seems that my supervisor was hiding a lot of things from me. Also, if the entity can sneak in smoke or gas inside the black room, then it means that even there I am no longer safe. Like it said, I have no idea what it can do. However, I think my supervisor and I need to meet and talk once again. Let me just hope that tomorrow, Monday, I will still be alive to do so. Since the weekend, I have started coughing incessantly, just like my children. My affliction of lungs, however, came with a darker twist. Unlike my children, when I cough sometimes, my mouth unfortunately fills up with blood. The worst has happened. I am still shaking from what I saw. All I wanted to do is to work, being active, earn a salary, and take care of my family. Was that too much to ask? Why did I have to face that entity full of hate and grudge? After consulting a doctor on Saturday, my children and I have been found in normal health conditions, even though displaying symptoms of severe lung infection. Hence, we received treatment and medication aligning with that strange and contrasting observation. Despite the affliction, the kids overflowed with joy and energy about their strange and collective dreams, in each of them encountering the so-called voice, who recently taught them an eerie and irritating song about the black room. I told you last time that my wife is not an open-minded person like you people, but now even her is starting to get very uncomfortable with the strange phenomenon happening to the children. Monday finally arrived, and I could not wait to meet my supervisor. Before going to the appointment, I checked my contract for the umpteenth time, still flabbergasted by its content that I am sure was not the same when I first read and signed it. At 5 p.m., I was already at work, waiting patiently for my supervisor to make time for me. To my surprise, he showed up with several gas masks, indicating that he still reads my posts and showing concerns about the situation. He apologized, himself unaware that the safety of the black room could be bypassed by the entity, also referring to it by its name. The kind of name that cannot be borne by a human, the kind of name that I rather not share with you, for your own sake. Clearly unwilling to share more and unable to provide better solutions, he handed me a sleep mask, referring to his advice about closing my eyes and not moving if trapped. To be honest, I still cannot see how that item can be useful. Then came the night. Midnight or not, for any little pause, I would sit in the black room, still traumatized and terrorized by the entity. At 12 a.m., there was no sign of it on any of the monitors. I did not forget anything outside of the room, and was no longer interested in seeing that evil being. Therefore, I remained in the black room, convincing myself that I had everything to counter its attacks. At 12:17 a.m., it startled me through the radio, using the voice of a kid to sing that awful song the voice taught my children. Little son, in the little black room, come out and have fun, or I will eat you and the moon. It repeated while my surprised self just looked at the radio placed on the little desk in front of the monitors. This might not seem concerning to you, however. Sun and Moon are nicknames my wife and I have carried for years since our marriage. When I decided that I had heard enough, I plugged my earbuds and just watched the screen of the radio flickering. Something else then caught my attention on the monitors, especially the one linked to the camera at the entrance of the building. The man with the black motorcycle helmet stood in front of the sliding doors, looking inside. I wondered what was he looking for, and especially if he was seeing anything out of the ordinary. But from what I have seen thus far, as long as it is midnight, even that person could be the entity itself, or at least just one of its tricks. The man walked around the facility unbothered by the cameras and just left around 12:40 a.m. Meanwhile, the entity had kept on with the song as I heard it still singing once I removed the earbuds at 12:59 a.m., before it abruptly stopped at 1 a.m., allowing me to resume my shift. On the next day, the entity did the exact same thing, being absent from the corridors and just singing through the radio. At that moment, I wondered how this being managed to reach my children, humans that never stepped even a toe into this building or any other location tied to this company from what I know. Just like the day before, I grew irritated with the song and plugged my earbuds. This time, however, there was no man lurking outside or anything else out of the ordinary to captivate my attention. Fearing that the entity might get angrier and launch another smoke attack, I looked around, ready to put the gas mask on, only to be struck by terror. Behind the return air vent grid, located close to the ceiling, I spotted a single yellow eye glowing, its brightness amplified by the black paint of the room. I jumped off the chair and let out a scream, followed by many others, as I could not stop myself. My fear took me to a corner of the room, curling me up in a futile attempt to protect myself, knowing that I could not even get out of the room to flee. Closing my eyes and hoping to be just hallucinating, I then heard a thud sound followed by the noise of something falling on the floor. I looked at the object and saw that it was the first screw off the grid. The entity then kept on using its telekinetic powers, removing the other screws one after the other until the grid fell on the floor. All I could see was total darkness surrounding the yellow eye. It shone brighter, illuminating the room like a flashlight, except for its own head, still wrapped in darkness somehow. That cold sensation of absolute unease invaded my body once again, as I felt that the thing looking at me, and that I should not be seeing, did not belong in this world. It was still unable to step into the room, I guess, so it just stared, alternating between covering my eyes and getting peeks through my fingers like a scared little kid. I monitored the entity to the best of my ability until it disappeared at 1 a.m. I rushed out of the black room, on the verge of losing my mind, screaming like a madman until I exited the building to catch some breath. What more can I take of all this before I end up insane? I did not even notice him until he started his engine. I looked up and saw the man with the black motorcycle helmet, preparing to speed up after watching me from the other side of the road on his motorbike. As if I did not have enough on my plate already. Honestly, what does he want from me? Livid and empty, I returned home the next morning, welcomed by my children who stood right behind the entrance door of our home, waiting for me. Already expecting the worst, I neither greeted them nor addressed them a smile, but rather got to the point, asking them what was that about. The worst I expected, but the worst I obtained, as they told me that the entity was still waiting for me outside of the black room, surprisingly calling that monster by its name. The sky is darker. My kids, my lovely kids, they no longer listen to anything. All that matters for them is the black room. Or should I say me getting out of the black room. They spend their nights talking simultaneously about it, like some freaking possessed twins or whatever. They sleepwalk, they skip school, they no longer play, they no longer fear any threat or punishment. And my wife sometimes catch them staring at me when I sleep. I had to explain everything to her. I will not say that enough. My wife does not believe in those kind of things. For her, it should rather be some kind of chemical acting on my mind and the children's, except on her because she may have a different or stronger organism. That is the kind of thing she can and prefer to process because she is really not in any supernatural stuff. She plans to call the help of a psychologist. Unlike some people, my supervisor never blamed me for breaking any of the rules. This is probably because he broke them himself in the past, which resulted in the scar he got. Instead, he asked me to meet him at work last Wednesday and showed an outstanding level of compassion and empathy, scratching his head to find solutions to problems that never happened before with the entity. Once again, I seized the opportunity to ask questions about the entity and the black room, but still bumped into a wall as my supervisor refused to tell me more. pretending not to have the full picture. He kept on assuring me on that, knowing that I do not believe him, since he reads my posts, and promising me that he will share some useful tips about the job with me, just like in the past. Darker clouds gathered when I learned that my day shift counterpart had deserted the job without any explanation. Not believing that there was no reason, I attempted to trick my way into the black room, as it is also the control room for all the cameras, in order to look for any interesting footage. However, I was slapped with another rule, learning that even myself could not be in the black room during the day. I remember that even when I spent the whole day at the company after my blunder, I was only allowed to sit at the open space area, right from 7:30 a.m. As seeking for answers was not against any rule, I pulled informations out of several employees who did not know what exactly happened with my day shift counterpart, except for the fact that he just ran outside and never came back. On the same occasion, I gathered a few more information about the different kinds of baffling rules other employees have to follow in this institution. Everyone except me shares the rule of not being around by 6:30 p.m. Some could not use specific bathrooms at specific times. There is even one who has the obligation of arriving over 30 minutes late every workday. On Thursday, when my shift started, my first personal objective was to finally see the camera recordings. Either by negligence or by complete indifference, nothing about the past days was altered or erased, allowing me to set my eyes on more horror. The day my colleague abandoned the job, I could see him making his way back to the entrance of the building, passing the closed black room when something inside caught his attention. I could see him talking to someone inside the room, someone that seemed trapped while trying to open the door. My colleague tried to help, but the door was locked. I then saw him nodding, as if receiving instructions from the person inside, before he rushed to the supervisor's office and then came back to the black room with the keys. He then opened the door, stood there for a few seconds and looking inside, apparently surprised of not seeing anyone, before he quickly closed the door and locking it back. He stepped backwards in fear, then took off running, and that was the last time he has ever been seen in the facility. Minutes later on the footage, I saw my supervisor arrive at the entrance, and one of the employees around apparently notified him about my colleague running outside. The supervisor ran to his office, then to the black room, and screamed in frustration the moment he saw the keys still on the door. He chased the people who followed him away, then seemed to talk to himself in front of the door. Afterwards, he unlocked it, blindfolded himself with a black cloth or something that he pulled out of his pocket, and entered in the black room. It was around 2:26 p.m. I kept on wondering what kind of creepy circus was on in this company. At midnight, for the first time in the job, nothing happened. No creepy singing, no distortion, no apparition whatsoever, and no threatening. I do not know what occasioned the day off, but I just enjoyed the tranquility, achieving a 50 minutes rest until it was 1 a.m. The next day, there was almost war at home because I could not find my gloves, and I was persuaded that the kids were the culprits. Despite searching for what seemed like decades, my wife and I could not find even one of them. Therefore, I had to go to work without them. And especially, I no longer had a complete uniform or armor. If you have been reading attentively since the beginning, you know what this means. Load shedding was scheduled for midnight once again, and I spent the first minutes of the dreaded hour checking my surroundings in the pitch black room. Soon the radio and the phone emitted static, testifying about the entity's presence. It did not say anything out loud or through the devices. It was not in the vent like that time, so it was probably right behind the door, silent and still, like a freaking creep. Meanwhile, though bracing myself for another terrible experience, I tried to relax, playing with one of my fancy flashlights and drowning myself in my thoughts. Why do I call them fancy flashlights since the first posts? Some of you might be wondering. It is simply because they have extra lamps. I am not an expert in these things, but if I had to describe further, just like now, well, let me say that those extra lamps emit different kinds of lights: neon, fluorescent, black light, UV, or whatever they can be called. At first, I was playing around by switching it on and off in the normal and usual mode. However, at 12:51 a.m., I decided to try the other light modes, occasionally turning the room into a nightclub with the neon lights, but when I switched to what I think is the UV mode, the room changed completely. I saw traces on the wall. I shined the light against lines and curves strangely glowing in red, forming very crafty patterns that covered the black paint. I changed modes, from normal to neon, and the patterns disappeared. I switched back to UV and they all reappeared. The patterns were everywhere in the room and emerged from 5 drawn figures, one on 3 of the walls, one on the floor, and one on the ceiling. They looked like men with 2 arms and 2 legs, but with mangled faces, and they held bizarre and uncomfortable positions. Their bodies seemed covered with paints and ceremonial robes on top. Several tribal-looking masks replaced each of the monitors, and there was even a hidden door next to the cupboard. One of the figures, drawn with its head turned on its left, seemed to look at the hidden door only visible with the UV light. I approached the figure, trying to get details about its mangled face. The iris of the figure moved as it looked at me. I gasped, jumped back, and switched the flashlight to normal mode and made everything disappear. My heart racing, my forehead streaming with sweat at that point. I trembled with the device between my hands before trying the UV mode again. All the 5 figures in full flesh, I presume, were off the walls, ceiling, and floor, and then standing on my right. I only caught a glimpse of them, and could not even hold the flashlight as I ran to the main door, forgetting about the entity that waited for me on the other side. The moment I unlocked it, the entity violently pushed the door open and made me fall on the ground as I closed my eyes in pain and fear. I could feel its light through my closed eyes and only heard all of them roaring. Whether they screamed at me or at each other, I do not know. It only lasted a few seconds before they disappeared at the exact moment the electricity came back on, of course, 1 a.m. I opened my eyes and looked at the flashlight, still in UV mode, but no longer revealing any hidden thing under the illumination of the lit corridor and the lit light bulb on the ceiling. Still on the floor, the loud noise of the thunder outside then startled me as a storm raged on the city. I was ready. I was finally ready to run and not look back, just like my colleague. Whether in or out of the black room, I do not see any safety or sanity there for me. I am about to leave this job. The company and my supervisor? They can come for me for all I care, but they better play their cards right, or I might officially expose them with names and locations. I will keep you updated on everything that will unfold. Something tells me that leaving will not be that easy. This is not the last time we will hear about the Black Room. Until next time on Wednesday, stay safe. This world is crazy. On Monday, my wife woke me up in absolute panic, shouting about something happening to the children. We both rushed to their bedroom and found them lying straight in their beds and very pale, like corpses on autopsy tables. My wife stopped at the door, murmuring that something was not right, while I was trying to shake my children awake, calling their names. She then said that she shook them just like I was doing before she came to wake me up, but could not understand how they were back lying down completely straight. I then asked her to call an ambulance. Fortunately, they are both far from being dead, according to the doctor. However, up to this point as I am typing this post, there is still no clear explanation for their condition, and they are still unconscious, trapped in some sort of coma. Around 6 p.m. the same day, I received a call from my supervisor, who was worried about me not yet showing up at work, since I was always on time and 6:30 p.m. was fast approaching for him. I refrained from explaining what had happened to my children to him, even though he will read it here later. I did not want to use the condition of my children as a way to get some sort of emergency leave. I was done with that job, so I said it straight and raw. "This is not happening, my friend," he calmly responded. "Look, this is surely not the conventional way to quit a job, but when employees choose this path, most of the time in this country, the employers just let them go as they always feel powerful and confident enough to replace staff even on the same day. I could understand that 30 minutes or so were not enough to replace me before the next shift, but my supervisor seemed to make it clear that the company will not let me go. I was not allowed to quit." While the conversation slowly evolved into an argument, my wife once again came to fetch me as something was happening to the kids. I hanged up and rushed towards their room. "Go back to your duty, Cole. The Black Room awaits," they kept on repeating, still lying straight, just speaking simultaneously and mechanically to pass that terrifying message. The nurses turned to my wife and I, communicating only through their expressions, asking us what was happening and what were they talking about. They stopped before the doctor arrived. Conquered by fear and anxiety, my wife left the room in tears, on the verge of just losing her mind. Meanwhile, my supervisor kept on calling, harassing me on the phone. I picked up to put an end to that, and we argued a little bit more. He concluded by saying that if I did not resume the job, I should expect a visit from the enforcer before hanging up on me. I needed to be with my wife. On Tuesday, In the early hours of the morning, as we were still in the hospital, I finally told my wife that I will not be returning to that work. Surprisingly, she did not react to it at all, but instead she opened up a little bit about some strange things she has been experiencing on her own, and that she tried to ignore or repress for her sanity. She explained to me that during the days when I am off duty, she sometimes takes care of the laundry, and for the occasion, she would include all the items that are parts of my uniform. However, those items, despite not emanating smoke, would come out of the washing machine burning hot. One time, when she was about to remove the items from the washing line, she noticed something on the t-shirt. The sun was behind it in terms of trajectory, and she could see transparent patterns on the cloth, making her wonder what type of fancy fabric was used for just a t-shirt. I left her there and rushed home to confirm what she saw while trying to reach my day shift counterpart on the phone to no avail. I had been trying to contact him since last weekend. I arrived home and retrieved the remaining parts of the uniform, and on them, I used the sole fancy flashlight I reserved for home and personal use. Nothing was visible at first, even in the UV mode, but when I moved the UV light behind the clothes, I saw and recognized the crafty patterns from the black room. I tried the same thing with everything that came from that company, including the contract, and I saw the patterns even through the paper. The next day, after informing my wife about my future actions, I went to the company with the uniform in a conveniently black garbage bag without any prior phone call to my supervisor. Right at the entrance, I was greeted by a sight of horror when I saw the motorcycle guy standing there with the red uniform as a replacement to my day shift counterpart. He refused to let me in, acting on instructions from the supervisor, who soon stepped out to meet me there. Doing my best by avoiding keywords in front of that stalker dude, I explained to my supervisor that I was not returning to work, just like my previous day shift counterpart, because of reasons he definitely knew of. Once again, he protested, reminding me about the terms of the contract, which I believe he also knew was content shifting. Under the look of the motorcycle guy, smirking with satisfaction, I threw the garbage bag containing the uniform in front of his feet before storming off, determined to leave that dark part of my life behind. Emotions and distress overwhelmed me during that day, preventing me from functioning correctly, which as well explains why I could not write, edit, and post an update at that time. Once again, my apologies. On Thursday, after being tired of calling my colleague to no avail, I typed his name on browsers and social media apps and managed to get one of his accounts. I checked his contacts and posts on the social media app and could identify his wife. I wasted no time to send a request, and she wasted no time to accept, going as far as calling me first. It turned out that both of us were looking for my colleague, a fact that crushed me, just like what she had to say, explaining me that one night at 12 a.m., the police came to look for him. He went with them, but he never returned since. There was no record about any officer being dispatched to his home, so even the law enforcement did not recognize having a hand in his disappearance. The next day, my wife and I were smoking in the living room at around 6 a.m., unable to sleep because of the whole ordeal. In fact, we spent the whole night there. The condition of the children had worsened, as gangrene had appeared on some parts of their little and fragile bodies, slowly ushering them into death. When I proposed her to go to the bedroom and get some rest, she declined, encouraging me to go alone. I opened the door and gasped at what I saw waiting for me. She stood up and came to take a look, gasping as well at the sight. The garbage bag containing the uniform was back. Facing a nightmare that was then consuming her more than myself, my wife closed the door, hyperventilating in fear, and looked at me. She knew that I gave the uniform back. I told her everything, and that day she even apologized about not believing me at first. However, that was a clear sign of intrusion, and it had to be solved. In disbelief, I reopened the door, and we found the uniform out of the bag, then standing on its own in front of us, as if worn by an invisible entity, before it stormed towards us. I slammed the door closed, and whatever was on the other side banged on it relentlessly, without trying to use the doorknob. My wife lost it, yelling at it to just leave us alone while I received a call from the supervisor, and it seemed to make the supernatural occurrence stop on the spot. You may have a clear idea of what he had to say, but precisely his message can be rephrased as this: all that will not stop. For the sake of your kids, your wife, and yourself, before the enforcer pays you a visit, go back to work. There may be a day when these updates will stop prematurely. I think that I really should return to work for now because everything is really getting out of control. Many of you, as real human beings with genuinely good hearts, have ignored my mistakes and suggested a lot of ideas since the first post. I have explored some of them. This time, everything is much worse, and once again, after sharing my story to the community, I beg you to suggest anything that might get me and my family out of this deadly trap, please. I went back to work. I went back to that place. My kids are still in the hospital, my wife is still in distress, and I am still gangrened by the mere fact of being linked to that company. No sanctions whatsoever against me, even after abandoning my position for one good week. You know, it is as if they know that the job in itself is already a worthy punishment. I will sure get the money once again, and yes, it will be useful. But the things I witnessed this week. Before I continue with this post, I would like to thank all those who took the time to suggest ideas and tips for me to escape this mess, no matter the tone used. I also thank all those who could not provide any advice, but at least wished my family and I well. Thank you very much, all of you. On Monday, once again, but not in the same mood as the previous times, I had to wear the uniform. The gloves are still missing, but of course this is not the most important at the moment. I do not even know what is that uniform, especially with what it displayed last time. Is it alive? Is it also an entity all by itself, just like the figures on the walls of the black room? I wore the black clothes, feeling like I was wearing death, and trembling to the core. Despite me having the uniform on, my wife refused to stay alone at home and preferred to be at the hospital, where she also knows that load shedding is not allowed. Upon arrival at the facility, I noticed that the motorcycle guy, or my new colleague, who we will call Dylan for the sake of the story, is the only person who openly shows anger concerning my return to work. Fed up with his nonsense, I confronted him about the reasons of his hatred, but everything that came out of his mouth was garbage I cannot include in this post just to avoid it being removed by you-know-who. Before leaving, he promised me to engineer my dismissal all by himself. I refrained to tell him that he was my guest. For the most part of the evening, I found myself visiting the black room, building up the courage to use my flashlight in UV mode to see what could go wrong, but I failed to do so before 10 p.m. I then tried the UV mode outside of the black room, after switching the lights off, and I was baffled by a spectacle that shocked me but at the same time did not surprise me. The patterns were there, and I could not tell if they emerged from the black room, or if they instead converged towards it. Even the transparent patterns on my uniform were then shining in red when I directed the light towards me. Those patterns were everywhere in the company, in the kitchen, in the restrooms, at the entrance, everywhere. However, there was not even one drawn figure like those in the black room, but there were more of those small black invisible doors. Behind one of them, I could hear voices, like several people calmly discussing something important. Almost like a professional meeting, but I could not find the courage to open that door. Instead, I went back to the black room and found the courage to use the UV mode there at 11:34 p.m. I could see the patterns in the small black door, but the figures were not there and the monitors did not turn to tribal masks. I left the UV mode on and waited for midnight. As soon as it was 12 a.m., someone behind the invisible small door spoke. I just blinked, and the monitors changed to the tribal masks, and the figures made their appearances on the walls, floor, and ceiling. I froze, expecting them to move like last time, but they did not. The voice behind the small door next to the cupboard continued, repeating the same words over and over like a recording. I could only understand the first word when I approached, which was identify. Was it a machine? I almost vomited my heart when the entity started banging on the black room main entrance. I deactivated the UV mode, and the entity started laughing hysterically while still banging on the main entrance, promising my family and I death that nobody has experienced before. It remained there, and I also stayed still, listening to everything until it all stopped at 1 a.m. The next day, I went to the library hoping to find anything that could help. I do not have any picture, any video, or any other evidence, except for my uniform, my contract, and the name of the entity. I did not know how I could explain the situation without being labeled as a crazy person, so I tried asking the librarian I spoke to about any resources concerning the entity. The moment I mentioned its name, she looked at me as if I insulted her and asked me to get out. I tried to appease the situation, but she screamed for the security, and just like that, I was outside. Later, fortunately, I did not see my day shift counterpart when I arrived at the facility. Soon I found myself completely alone in the building once again, and managed to ask myself some very interesting questions. Who guards the place at night when I do not work on Wednesday and the weekend? Who did in the previous week during which I did not work? Unfortunately, when I tried to get answers to those questions through the corresponding camera recordings, I noticed that the relevant footages were missing. As a result, I went through the normal routine until I found myself facing one of the worst situations so far. At 11:41 p.m., I heard 4 loud bangs coming from the storage area while I was busy making coffee in the kitchen. Confident that this was not yet the time for the spooky show, I made sure to do my job correctly, finding the courage to investigate the noises. Going to the storage area with only the radio, I could not see anyone or anything suspicious. I then heard 2 loud bangs coming from the entrance, and I also went to verify but did not see anything until a figure emerged from behind the circular reception counter. His identity concealed by his horrifying clown mask. The intruder soon presented his machete before he jumped over the desk to give pursuit. Chased by the intruder, I stormed towards the black room and won the race, locking the black room door before he could catch up. He banged on the door for just a few seconds before he sped off, going back to the storage area. When I wanted to use the radio to notify the authorities, I immediately noticed a static sound. It was midnight. For the first time, the entity had started its reign of terror, right in front of the black room door, instead of the reception area. Then it set itself in motion. The intruder was busy using his weapon to break open some of the storage unit's doors, oblivious to the threat coming its way. Many people cannot help themselves, seizing any opportunity to criticize me for breaking the rules. However, I will never regret doing something wrong like breaking a rule, if it is for something right, like saving a fellow human being's life. Breaking the no communication rule, I used the black room microphone to tell him to run away for his life. He did not take me seriously at first until he heard something from the entity that made him flee. From the monitors and the distortions, I could see the entity do things I never saw it do before, like disappearing and reappearing at seemingly random places. It left in its trails new images on the monitors, as I could no longer recognize some parts of the building. The screen showing the entrance, for example, was then showing a wall. I then heard the entity using my voice and the speakers of the building to direct the intruder back to the black room. I tried to counter its trick to no avail, and noticed the entity standing still behind the black room door, while the intruder was running towards a certain death. The man turned and saw the entity on the spot. He made small steps backwards, dropping his machete before removing his mask. I saw his face dressed in terror, but I did not recognize him. He then lifted his hand as if he was pointing at the entity and screamed like I never heard a man scream before. He ended up on the floor, convulsing, while the entity did not move by an inch, the monitor showing the black room door still affected by the distortion. The intruder stopped moving at some point, and the entity remained at the door, still and silent, until it quietly spoke at 12:59 a.m. "You are next." At 1:01 a.m., I exited the black room and approached the intruder. He was dead, with tears in his eyes and foam in his mouth, after overdosing on a pure and sheer concentration of a basic human emotion, fear. I was right about avoiding to take a look at that thing, and after what happened at the library, I think I was right about avoiding mentioning its name in this post or anywhere else. Out of nowhere, my supervisor showed up minutes later, not surprised about the dead man lying on the floor, and even asked me to help him with loading the body in his car. I refused to help him, and he just responded by shaking his head and chuckling, before he dragged the body away to my absolute disbelief. He then came back and warned me not to do anything stupid until we have another meeting soon, and left, commanding me to continue working. Madness. Complete madness. He phoned me later congratulating me for my hard work and telling me that the company was so happy that the higher-ups had another surprise gift for me, only available when I come back to work on Thursday. However, I think I received a surprise gift already, in the form of a direct message. There are many messages with people asking me to give them permission to narrate this series of posts on their channels. Good people, I am not ignoring you, but understand that at this moment, my family and I are going through serious and life-threatening stuff. Please let this series and all this madness be over first, then we will discuss about permission. For now, Our lives are in serious danger. The surprise gift I am talking about is the only direct message about a man named Connor who wants to meet and help me and my family. He says he has been through a similar situation and has warned me not to approach any police car during midnight, especially if the officer inside is alone. It could be the enforcer. There is no excuse for this. I am supposed to keep the commitment and post at the days I myself alluded to in the first post. Please accept my sincere apologies. However, my family gets the priority in this matter, and it is for them that I have been absent during those past days. Of course, a lot has happened in that time frame, therefore, here are the events spanning from last week Thursday to this Wednesday. My supervisor and a few other higher-ups I have never seen before applauded me as soon as I arrived to the workplace last Thursday. On the other hand, Dylan was boiling with resentment and rage. Why? A brand new car. One of the most luxurious CVZs on the market was the surprise gift that the company decided to award me with after my previous and disastrous shift. I did not want it and could not smile. After all, I just witnessed a person die recently and being disposed of like mere trash. They all dismissed my expressions and body language, resolute to carry on with the facade. During the shift, midnight and the rest, I stayed in the black room, broken and crying, trembling and coughing up blood. I did not pay attention to anything or anyone and just left in the morning without taking the black SUV with me. I went directly to the hospital to see my wife and kids. On Friday, while commuting, I had an interesting chat with Connor, still on his way to the city I live in. The conversation did not go exactly like that, but this post does not need to be unnecessarily long, so I have just included the most relevant parts. When we meet in, I asked. Soon, he answered. Who are you anyway? Why should I trust you? I questioned. I'm the one who want to help. At least the closest one. I know what's going on exactly. I know what to do. And you don't. I've been linked to that company. I have been in that town and I know what I went through back in 2013 and later. You worked there? I asked. Not directly. And whatever that surprise gift is, don't take it, he replied. Why? I questioned. Just curious about his reply. It will be your downfall. You know what they say, if you can't beat them, join them. Unless I help you and we try something, I only see two options for you. The grave, or you become the next supervisor. The latter is the worst, Connor replied. So you know what all those things are. Why me? Why my family? What do they want? I asked. Why you? Man, you applied for a job there. What you think a corporation want to do with you? They want to squeeze the juice out of you to the last drop, and all for their own benefit. They don't care about you, your life, your freedom, your family, your kids. You're not a human to them. You a selected productivity unit. In this case, a mere cow for a ritual, where the entity is the farmer and the company owns the farm, or is the farm. This is bigger than us, and it runs deeper, with the government of this country, things like WFHVS, RTO, and much more, he revealed. The chat went on, and he eventually sent me a link to his own post, https://www.com/r/nosleep/SBCN/SBCon/midnight_survival/. If I did not go through my own experiences with the entity, I would not believe his terrifying encounter with the enforcer. However, his first suggestion is something that can easily make me believe that he tried to kill me. Connor advised me to break all the rules established by the institution, except the one to avoid seeing the entity. Connor mainly wanted me to talk to it. Later on, I started the shift as usual, but stayed once again in the black room all the time. My supervisor, who still has an eye on me during my shifts, called me, but I ignored him, preferring to reflect on my life and all the events. Who was that clown mask guy? Was he just a thief? What will happen to my kids? What will happen if I directly interact with this thing? At midnight, the entity came to the door and told me that it was preparing a surprise for the moon. I fought hard internally, trying to build up the courage to address it directly, something it always tried to make me do, but I refrained. Then, maybe frustrated about my silence, the entity did something I never thought it could do. With one precise, mighty strike, it broke the door of the black room open. I almost caught a glimpse of it, briefly seeing a yellow and warm light, while the door flew in my direction. I curled and turned around, got hit by the door but kept my ground. I then opened my eyes while facing the wall, and saw the reflection of my shadow, surrounded by the one of the entity which extended countless limbs all around the doorframe, as it still could not enter inside the room. We could both hear my heart beating and my heavy breathing. Each time I moved by even an inch, the entity moved too around the door frame, with unnatural movements that I cannot not find words to describe yet, as I could not even make out its appearance. I could not talk to it. I really thought it would make it strong enough to finally end me inside the black room. "I shall feast on your heart. When the time comes," it quietly said with a soft woman's voice, then its shadow disappeared a few seconds later, leaving only mine against the wall. As you probably guessed, it was 1 a.m., but I remained petrified for at least 30 minutes. There is no way I could talk to it. I told Connor the truth about that later that day in the morning. A human cannot just confront that thing. He understood my fear and notified me that he had arrived in the city. He asked me to directly go to the hospital where he was already waiting for me. We went to the kids' room almost immediately and woke up my wife as we arrived. After closing the doors and windows, switching the lights off and plunging us in the dark, Connor pulled out his own fancy flashlight from his backpack and used the UV mode right on the kids. It revealed something shining from inside their chests, and they just began convulsing while slowly vomiting something black. On his instructions, I had to hold my wife and prevent her to scream at him and the horrifying spectacle until the black objects were completely out of their mouths. They were the missing gloves. My kids woke up almost instantly, seemingly cured on the spot. After what the entity had showed me on Friday, my wife and I contemplated the idea to just run away from all that, even if we had to start over somewhere else. We had even started preparing our escape during the weekend. Therefore, I did not post anything here, and subsequently, I did not go to work on Monday and Tuesday. Connor was against the idea and reminded me that it did not really work for him. He only alluded to it in his post, but he had to fight back for his family and himself just like I have to do, especially if I want to stop my own health affliction. A problem needs to be resolved, not ignored or abandoned. I had to return there, not to continue being their slave, but to end it once for all. Meanwhile, my supervisor left many messages, apologizing for the more and more aggressive behavior of the entity, begging me to return to work, and offering me to meet the management board on Friday. I could no longer understand that man. He is becoming an enigma in the same way the entity is. Nothing makes sense in this company. However, there was something that I could easily understand: danger. Just today at midnight, by the window, I saw a silent police car, with lights off, moving up and down the alley, as if the officer, or should I say the enforcer, waited for the right moment to strike. My mind was conquered by something when I started writing this post. Something I had not seen them do for a long time. My wife, my kids, all of them had genuine smiles illuminating their faces. The breeze invited itself inside the train as we made our way to another city and a new life. Some days ago, I personally would not believe that things could take such a turn for the better. Therefore, for this last part about my story, let me update you on what occurred. We remained indoors in our house while I waited for Friday, 27th October to arrive. Connor kept in touch with me as we elaborated a plan for how I had to attend the meeting. When the day arrived, Connor drove me to the workplace, while providing me with the items and the tips I needed to put a definitive end to the nightmare. I arrived at work, finding Dylan in a strange and unusual mood, dressed in black like myself instead of red. He was not antagonistic with me as before. Instead, he seemed to be trying hard to be nice, while displaying an expression full of worries. My supervisor chose an extremely friendly attitude, contrasting with the reasons why he organized the meeting, not even mentioning my absences. What surprised me the most was the venue and the time of the meeting overlapping boardroom at midnight. What did he mean by overlapping? I thought, already knowing that it was the next topic for a chat with Connor before we reached midnight. My supervisor then left without providing further details, apparently expecting me to work. However, I had other plans that could get compromised by serious obstacles. One of them was Dylan. For whatever reasons, even after 6:30 p.m., he did not leave. When I asked him why he was still there, he said that he could not leave and that the company had trapped him. Nervous, trembling, and almost crying, he had difficulties to express himself. Of course, I asked him to elaborate, and he confessed to be the one who sent the man with the clown mask and the machete days ago. His plan was to organize a scenario that highlights my incompetency in order to get me fired and get him somehow in the spotlight. The company found out but chose to exploit him instead of handing him over to the authorities. Dylan tried to make his mark in the company, and after achieving just that, somehow he was terrified. He had been asked to wait there without any mentioned reasons and obeyed, not having a choice. During the whole evening, he pestered me with questions, and I managed to explain him the situation, making him more aware but also more afraid. I asked him if they made him sign anything new, and he replied that it was not yet the case, but the process was already launched. We neither patrolled nor indulged in any work activity. I was busy discussing the plan with Connor through text messages, while Dylan just stared at the floor, occasionally breaking the silence with his questions. We just remained in the black room and waited as he became more and more nervous. Minutes before midnight, Dylan apologized for antagonizing me, but I brushed it off, demanding him to rather apologize to the family of the man he involved and succeeded in getting killed. Empathizing with me about breaking the rules, he assured me that the company had to know it and also counted on that. According to him, he does not know of one existing rule on Earth that has not been broken at least once, for one reason or another, even by those who are supposed to be custodians of said rules. It is just human nature. Midnight then finally arrived. I gathered the whole courage I could and cut off the lights from the room, thus creating my own load shedding and plunging the entire building in darkness. I left Dylan alone in the black room and stepped out of there with a backpack ready to execute the plan. I made my way towards the boardroom, my heart beating and filled with fear at the idea of encountering the entity. I thought about something Connor told me earlier, understanding a little bit more what was meant by overlapping, but my train of thoughts came to an abrupt stop when I saw yellow lights approaching. I quickly pulled out a piece of fabric from my pocket and blindfolded myself before tossing the backpack a few meters away from me. Connor had better be right about that. I heard the entity approach, the noises it made on the floor making it seem like a group of people walking or rolling on the ground. I heard it inspect the bag for a few seconds, move around a little bit more before it startled me with a question. "Identify your soul," it asked with a child's voice. The moment to practice everything that Connor taught me had arrived, as he explained. If you do not have something from them on you, and you don't use your eyes, then that thing won't be able to recognize you. "Pilgrim," I responded, according to Connor's instructions, not having a clue about what I was saying. "Function," it said with a woman's voice. "Unknown," I replied, getting several and long minutes of silence as a response. The entity's silence plunged me in an unbearable discomfort. I thought that it was about to rip my head off my neck. "House," it asked with an old man's voice, as I felt its lamps getting closer to my face, also hearing the metallic sounds they made all around me. "Concealed," I spoke, plunging the entity in confusion, according to Connor. As a result, the entity remained silent for a few seconds. I then heard it continue its way, and I waited several minutes before removing the blindfold. I then picked up the backpack and carried on with the plan, reaching the boardroom at around 12:27 a.m. I pulled out a fancy flashlight from the bag, set it to UV mode, and shone the light on the white door, which immediately turned to black with the shining red patterns slowly appearing on it. I then opened the door and found 4 seated people, dressed in black robes, waiting for me inside. One of them was the supervisor. "Welcome, Cole. Please have a seat," my supervisor spoke, coldly, immobile, and looking straight in front of him, as if he was hypnotized. "Let's not waste further time," another spoke. "I never intended to," I replied, not intending to sit with those people. "First of all, Cole, whatever Connor has to tell, it won't help you. You're already involved so deeply in the project," one of the managers said. "You mean involved in the ritual?" I retorted. "Will you please switch off that thing?" my supervisor asked, referring to the flashlight. "Sure, but before, let me do one thing," I spoke, ready to put an end to the pain. From the bag, I pulled out the t-shirt of my uniform and the contract. At that moment, they realized that I was wearing a similar but fake uniform, and that the real one was in the bag. They all stood up. With swift movements, I tore the contract into 2 pieces, and was surprised by the blood that gushed out of the paper. I did the same with the t-shirt, ignoring the yells of the management board. Soon we heard a rumbling noise as something was charging towards the boardroom, attracted by what just occurred. I blindfolded myself again. "It's coming. We gotta hurry," the supervisor shouted. The entity burst in, and started a carnage I could only witness with my ears. Flesh tearing, bones crackling, screams of agony and pain resounding in the room, growing louder by second. Strangely, each of them begged the entity to stop, calling it with different human names. In the meantime, with my hands, I searched and found the door I came in through, ready to leave the management board members to their fate. But before I stepped out, "Please, don't go just yet," the entity spoke. I froze, but remained quiet. "Thank you for helping me," it added, but I just nodded in response. "What can I do for you?" "I'll do anything you want," it asked. "I want you to return to where you came from," I answered, according to Connor's instructions again. He warned me about the so-called nice side of the entity. This was a being beyond human understanding that had no sympathy, no empathy, or love whatsoever for people, even though it could sometimes fake or mirror such qualities. Therefore, it was wise for any human not to have such sentiments towards it. "I shall do it for you," it replied, maybe unaware that I had turned its trick against itself to send it far away from this world. I nodded again and stepped out before closing the door behind me. Slowly and confidently, and after removing the blindfold, I walked into the darkness of the corridors, going to the black room. I found the door open upon arrival, something I found very strange, and approached for further inspection. I discovered Dylan on the floor, dead in the same manner that his clown-masked accomplice died some days ago. He might have missed a part when I told him that the entity could be very subtle and cunning. Without calling for anyone, I simply waited in the room for 1 a.m., with the door open, then exited the building a free man. Connor, who patiently waited for me outside, sighed in relief upon seeing me and drove me back home. On the way, I asked him how he came to know about all those things, with the entity and the company, but he told me that his full story was for another time. The most important thing, as he said, is that I am now free, and that I should not expose the company. They have to cover the recent disappearances of their staff members anyway. They do not want any scandal. Among all the questions that flooded my mind, I could not retain the one that struck me the most: why Connor, a complete stranger, went out of his way to help me. Me of all people, the dumb and stupid rule breaker that deserves to die, because he brought a terrible fate upon himself anyway, right? In such an unforgiving world devoid of empathy, even towards fellow human beings, Connor was struck by my decision to help the clown-masked guy. That fact alone proved to him that I was a rare heart. By his own words, as he himself recognized that he would not have done the same. Hence, people like me help him to still believe in humanity. Following our conversation in the car, I have decided to follow Connor's steps and start something of my own. Something that I like to do, something that makes me feel happy, and that do not require me to report to anyone or hide from something. This is why my family and I are traveling. Even though he had already did too much for my family and I, Connor had proposed to help me yet again with anything he could. I will maybe update you on how we are faring, but that will be on another platform for sure. Narrators, this is the moment you have waited for. We can now discuss permissions to use my story on your channels. Everyone, please take care of yourselves, and thanks a lot for sharing that terrifying journey with me.